A teenage bedroom is supposed to be a sanctuary, but on a freezing November morning in 2016, that illusion was shattered forever. A 16-year-old girl lay fast asleep in her bed, her family resting just down the hall. There was no forced entry, no broken locks, no footsteps creeping up the stairs. Just a 9mm bullet ripping through an exterior wooden wall, finding its target in the pitch black with terrifying precision. A safe suburban home transformed into an execution chamber in a fraction of a second. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Knoxville, in Tennessee, sits tucked within the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains, a sprawling city that still manages to hold on to a tightly knit, small-town atmosphere. In the affluent, quiet subdivisions of the area, life revolves around Friday night football games, school spirit, and tight family bonds. This was the world of 16-year-old Emma Jane Walker. Born in 2000, Emma was the kind of teenager who naturally drew people into her orbit. She possessed a radiant, almost kinetic energy. With her bright blonde hair and constant smile, she fit the archetype of the popular American cheerleader. But those who knew her understood she was far more than a high school cliché. Emma was fiercely determined, possessing a sharp mind and a deeply empathetic core. She spent her weekends volunteering at local animal shelters, driven by a lifelong ambition to become a neonatal nurse. She wanted to spend her life caring for premature infants, a testament to her nurturing spirit and her desire to protect the most vulnerable. Her parents, Mark and Jill Walker, provided a stable, loving environment. They raised Emma and her older brother with a focus on respect, boundaries, and hard work. Emma was an honors student at Central High School, managing to balance the demanding schedule of competitive cheerleading with rigorous academic classes. Her bedroom was a reflection of her vibrant personality, walls covered in photographs of friends, cheer ribbons, and mementos of a happy, sheltered adolescence. To the outside observer, Emma's life was a picture of suburban perfection. She was moving steadily toward a bright, meticulously planned future. She had the grades, the ambition, and the unyielding support of a family who adored her. In the fall of 2014, when Emma was a high school freshman, she crossed paths with a junior named William Riley Gall. Riley, who went by his middle name, was exactly the kind of boy who easily captured attention in a southern high school. He was 18, broad-shouldered, and a wide receiver for the Central High School Bobcats football team. Riley was polite, soft-spoken, and well-liked by his peers and coaches. He came from a religious family, regularly attended church, and seemed to embody the ideal student-athlete. To a 14-year-old freshman, the attention of an older, popular varsity football player was incredibly flattering. The initial stages of their interaction were entirely normal, exchanging messages, talking in the hallways between classes, and spending time together at school events. By all outward appearances, Emma and Riley were the quintessential high school power couple, the cheerleader and the football player. They began officially dating, and their relationship quickly became the center of both their lives. Riley appeared incredibly devoted, attending all of Emma's cheer competitions, bringing her gifts, and constantly expressing his affection. At first, this level of attention felt validating. It felt like love. But beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic teenage romance, a subtle shift was beginning to occur. Riley's devotion was not rooted in mutual respect, but in an intense, creeping need for possession. While Emma was looking for a partner to share her vibrant life with, Riley was looking for someone to completely consume. He was masking a deep-seated insecurity and a volatile temperament behind his quiet, polite exterior. As an athlete, he was accustomed to having control on the field, and he slowly began applying that same demand for control to his relationship with Emma. The transition from a caring boyfriend to a suffocating presence did not happen overnight. It was a gradual tightening of the grip, a slow erosion of Emma's independence disguised as romantic concern. At first, the dynamic between the two teenagers mirrored the classic high school narrative: bright, highly visible, and heavily documented on social media. They attended dances together, sat together in the bleachers, and appeared inseparable. But this outward projection of a perfect romance was a carefully constructed facade, one that Riley meticulously maintained while quietly dismantling Emma's autonomy behind closed doors. The transition from a doting partner to a suffocating captor did not happen in a single, explosive moment. Instead, it was an insidious, methodical process of isolation. It began with a digital leash. Riley demanded constant communication, requiring immediate responses to his text messages, regardless of where Emma was or what she was doing. A missed call or a delayed reply would result in a barrage of accusations. He insisted on having the passwords to her social media accounts, monitoring her private conversations under the guise of absolute transparency. He would scroll through her phone, dissecting her interactions with classmates, searching for any perceived slight or threat to his absolute authority over her attention. If she spoke to another male student, even just a casual greeting in the hallway, Riley would interrogate her, his jealousy flaring into quiet, intense anger. This need for control quickly bled into the physical world. He began dictating her wardrobe, expressing extreme displeasure if he deemed a dress too short or a cheerleading uniform too revealing. He pressured her to change her clothes, manipulating her by claiming that his demands were rooted in respect and protection. Emma, initially mistaking this possessiveness for fierce loyalty, tried to accommodate him. She altered her behavior, attempting to shrink herself to fit the narrow, rigid mold he was constructing for her. But Emma was inherently strong-willed. As the months bled into years, the claustrophobia of the relationship became impossible to ignore. The constant surveillance and baseless accusations sparked intense, exhausting arguments. The cycle became entirely predictable: a suffocating demand, a bitter fight, followed by Riley offering tearful apologies and extravagant promises to change. He would buy her gifts, write lengthy letters of devotion, and swear that his behavior was just a byproduct of how deeply he cared for her. Those closest to the couple began to notice the dark undercurrents. Emma's friends saw her radiant energy dimming. The girl who was once the center of every social gathering was now frequently anxious, constantly checking her phone, terrified of triggering another one of Riley's dark moods. Her parents, Mark and Jill, watched this toxic dynamic unfold with mounting dread. They recognized the classic red flags of emotional abuse and manipulation. They saw the toll it was taking on their daughter's mental health, the exhaustion behind her eyes, the sudden shifts in mood, the way she seemed to be constantly walking on eggshells in her own home. Mark and Jill stepped in, attempting to construct a protective barrier around their daughter. They implemented strict boundaries, banning Riley from their property and restricting Emma's ability to see him outside of school hours. At times, they even confiscated her phone, taking the blame upon themselves just to give their daughter a few hours of peace away from Riley's relentless digital bombardment. By the fall of 2016, Emma had reached her absolute limit. She was a high school junior now, focused on her future, her grades, and her friends. She realized that the relationship was a sinking ship, and she finally found the resolve to cut the anchor. She officially ended the relationship, telling Riley with absolute clarity that it was over and that she wanted nothing more to do with him. For a normal teenager, a breakup is a painful but necessary rite of passage. For Riley, it was an unacceptable loss of control. He refused to process the rejection. He simply decided that the breakup was not real, that Emma was just confused, and that he could force her back into submission. His behavior rapidly deteriorated from toxic boyfriend to relentless stalker. When Emma blocked his phone number, he used apps to generate fake numbers, bombarding her with hundreds of messages a day. When she ignored those, he weaponized guilt. He began threatening self-harm, sending dark, manipulative messages suggesting that he could not survive without her. He would wait outside her workplace, park his car near her neighborhood, and find ways to constantly insert himself into her physical space. Emma was no longer dating Riley, but she was entirely trapped by him. The high school romance had died, leaving behind a volatile, obsessed young man who was willing to go to terrifying lengths to prove that if he could not have her, no one else would. By mid-November 2016, the temperature in East Tennessee had plummeted into the freezing 30s, and a different kind of chill was settling over Emma's life. Riley was finally realizing that the relentless digital bombardment and emotional manipulation were no longer working. The breakup was sticking. Deprived of his control, his obsession mutated into something far more dangerous, a manufactured reality. If he could not win her back through guilt, he would try to win her back through fear. He needed to create a scenario where Emma was in absolute peril, a crisis that only he could solve. He was shifting from the rejected boyfriend to a fabricated savior. The psychological terror began a few days before the Thanksgiving break. Emma's phone vibrated with a series of text messages from an unknown, untraceable number. The sender claimed to have kidnapped Riley. The digital voice was threatening, ordering the 16-year-old girl to follow their instructions if she ever wanted to see her ex-boyfriend alive again. The anonymous sender demanded that she step outside her house alone. Instead of complying with the terrifying directive, Emma immediately contacted mutual friends, asking them to check on Riley's whereabouts. They found him perfectly safe, lounging in his college dorm room. It did not take a seasoned detective to deduce the origin of those messages. The clumsily executed threat was Riley's first attempt at a false flag operation, a desperate bid to force Emma to engage with him. But the theatrics were about to escalate from a digital nuisance into a physical nightmare. Friday, November 18th, Emma was at home alone. Her parents were out for the evening, leaving her in the quiet suburban house. Shortly before midnight, the silence was shattered. Heavy, violent pounding echoed from the front door. It was not a casual knock, but the aggressive thumping of someone trying to force the wood to splinter. Emma crept toward the entryway, her heart hammering against her ribs, and peered through the window. Standing on her porch was a tall figure dressed entirely in black, his face completely obscured by a dark hood. The figure aggressively rattled the heavy brass doorknob, checking the locks. Emma backed away, enveloped in a wave of cold panic. She locked herself inside her bedroom and frantically began messaging anyone who was awake, pleading for help. In a calculated twist of timing, Riley just happened to be in the neighborhood. He arrived at the property with suspicious speed. Riley messaged her, claiming he had bravely chased the dark-clad prowler into the nearby woods. He stood outside her house, adopting the role of the protective hero, waiting for her to open the door and fall into his arms. But Emma remained locked inside. When her mother, Jill, returned home shortly after, she found Riley loitering on the front lawn. The police were immediately dispatched to the residence. When responding officers questioned the college student, they noted his calm demeanor. He showed zero signs of physical exertion, no heavy breathing, no mud on his shoes, no adrenaline shakes that would accompany a foot chase through the brush in the pitch black. Recognizing his presence as a gross violation of their established boundaries, Jill ordered Riley off the property. The hero had failed to gain entry. Saturday, November 19th, less than 24 hours later, Riley amplified his staged drama. This time, he cast himself as the absolute victim. Early that morning, his college roommates reported him missing. They told campus security that they could not find him and that he had left his vehicle behind. Panic rippled through their social circles until later that afternoon, when a passerby spotted Riley wandering aimlessly along a desolate stretch of rural highway, miles from his campus. He was found near a shallow drainage ditch, looking disoriented. When sheriff's deputies arrived to investigate, Riley delivered an incredibly detailed yet deeply flawed narrative. He informed the officers that he had been ambushed at his car by unknown men, forcefully dragged into a mysterious van, and driven to an undisclosed location. The detectives listened patiently, but the cracks in his story were gaping. Despite claiming he had been abducted and dumped in the wild, Riley's clothes were impeccably clean. He had no defensive wounds, no bruises, and no scratches. The heavy scent of damp autumn leaves clung to the air, yet his shoes were dry. When pressed for descriptions of the kidnappers or the van, his memory conveniently dissolved into vague generalities. The authorities recognized it for what it was, a monumental waste of police resources and a glaring red herring. When Emma was informed of the supposed kidnapping, she felt no sympathy. The accumulation of the anonymous texts, the figure in the black hood, and now the bizarre roadside abduction crystallized into one undeniable truth. She confided in her closest friends that she believed Riley was faking the entire sequence of events just to manipulate her emotions and force her to talk to him. She firmly communicated through intermediaries that she saw right through his charade. The psychological grip was entirely broken. Riley's desperate staged attempts to play the rescuer had not only failed, but they had also alienated her completely. Stripped of his manipulative tools and facing absolute rejection, his manufactured crises evaporated. The theater was closing. What remained was a seething, volatile obsession, and a final chilling realization that if the role of the savior was no longer available to him, he would assume the role of the executioner. The weekend drew to a close, and a biting chill settled over Knoxville. By the early hours of Monday, November 21st, 2016, temperatures had plummeted into the low 30s Fahrenheit. Inside the Walker residence, the atmosphere was finally peaceful. The exhausting theatrics of the previous days, the anonymous threats, the prowler in the black hood, the fabricated kidnapping, seemed to have entirely evaporated. Emma was exhausted. She had spent Sunday evening talking with friends, firmly reiterating that she was completely done with Riley Gall. Her boundaries were set. She went to her ground floor bedroom, changed into comfortable sleepwear, and climbed into bed. She fell asleep quickly. Her bed was positioned snugly into the corner of the room, pressed directly against the home's exterior wooden wall. The house went dark. The suburban street fell dead silent. Outside, the frost began to harden on the grass. Sometime in the pitch black of the early morning, a figure approached the side of the Walker home. There was no attempt to bypass the locks, no fumbling with the windows, no desire to look the victim in the eye. This was not a crime of passion committed in the heat of a screaming argument. It was a cold, calculated execution. The perpetrator stood in the freezing yard, staring at the blank exterior wall of Emma's bedroom. He knew the exact layout of the room. He knew exactly where the bed was positioned. He understood the height and the precise angle required. He raised a 9mm handgun in the dark. He aimed meticulously at the spot where a sleeping girl's head would be resting against the drywall. He pulled the trigger. The blast of the 9mm shattered the suburban silence. A fraction of a second later, a second shot rang out. The physics of the event were terrifyingly precise. The heavy copper-jacketed bullets ripped instantly through the vinyl siding, splintered the wooden frame, and punched through the interior drywall. One bullet missed, embedding itself harmlessly into the room. The other found its mark with horrifying accuracy. The projectile struck the 16-year-old girl just behind her left ear while she was fast asleep. There was no time to react, no time to register fear or pain. Emma Walker's life ended in a fraction of a second, her vibrant future extinguished in the dark sanctuary of her own bedroom. Outside, the shooter lowered the weapon. He turned and vanished back into the freezing night, leaving no physical trace on the lawn, slipping away before the neighborhood even fully registered the sharp cracks echoing through the streets. Inside the house, the gunshots had briefly roused Emma's mother, Jill. She stirred in her sleep, disoriented by the sudden, sharp noises. But in the hazy confusion of the early morning hours, she rationalized the sounds. She assumed a heavy door had slammed somewhere in the house, or perhaps a large piece of furniture had fallen. The house quickly descended back into absolute silence. Assuming her children were safely asleep in their beds, Jill closed her eyes and drifted back to sleep. A few hours later, the sun crept over the horizon, bleeding gray morning light into the neighborhood. It was around 6 a.m. The Walker house began to wake up for a standard Monday morning. Routines commenced. Jill noticed that Emma was not awake yet. Her daughter was usually reliable with her morning schedule, needing plenty of time to get ready for school and cheerleading practice. The mother walked down the hallway to Emma's ground floor bedroom. She opened the door. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Emma was lying in her bed, her back turned to the door, seemingly fast asleep. Jill stepped into the room and gently called her daughter's name. No response. She approached the bed and reached out, gently shaking Emma's leg to rouse her. The horrific reality of the moment shattered the morning. Her daughter's skin was freezing to the touch. The 16-year-old was completely unresponsive. Panic seizing her throat, Jill frantically looked around the room, trying to process the impossible. It was then she noticed the faint metallic scent hanging in the stagnant air, mixed with the dry, chalky smell of pulverized drywall. She saw the small, jagged holes punched through the wall, directly above the mattress. The mother's screams tore through the house. The frantic, agonizing 911 call was placed at 6:30 a.m., but there was absolutely nothing the paramedics could do. Emma was gone. First responders arriving at the property were met with a scene of absolute devastation. The paradox of the setting was chilling. There were cheerleading ribbons hanging on the walls, photographs of smiling teenagers pinned to corkboards, and the mundane clutter of a high school student's life, all juxtaposed against the grim reality of a homicide investigation. The detectives noted the trajectory of the bullet holes immediately. The angles told a story of absolute premeditation. The shooter hadn't just fired blindly at a house. They had mapped out a kill zone from the outside, utilizing the victim's predictable sleeping habits against her. The investigation had officially begun, and the Knoxville police were staring down a terrifying mystery. Who would stand in the freezing dark just to execute a teenage girl through the walls of her own home? The immediate aftermath of the shooting plunged the Knox County Sheriff's Office into a forensic puzzle. The suburban property was cordoned off with bright yellow crime scene tape, a stark, unnatural contrast to the manicured lawns and quiet driveways of the neighborhood. Detectives and crime scene technicians began meticulously dissecting the geometry of the execution. They started outside. The freezing grass yielded very little physical evidence. No deep boot prints, no dropped items, no signs of a struggle. However, lying in the frost just a few feet from the exterior wall were 2 spent 9mm shell casings. The investigators analyzed the entry points in the vinyl siding. By inserting trajectory rods into the bullet holes and using laser levels, they mapped the exact flight path of the projectiles. The results eliminated any lingering theories of a tragic accident. The initial dead ends mirrored the classic frustrations of suburban homicide investigations. Without forced entry, detectives first had to consider if the bullets were the result of a random drive-by shooting or celebratory gunfire that had gone horrifically wrong. But the laser mapping proved otherwise. The trajectory rods pointed slightly downward, indicating the shooter was standing intimately close to the house, holding the weapon at chest level and firing at a precise downward angle right into the corner where the bed was located. It was not a stray bullet, it was a targeted assassination. The perpetrator knew the layout of the home, understood exactly where the victim slept, and possessed the chilling composure to execute the plan in the dark. As the sun fully rose, the social echo of the tragedy began to reverberate through Knoxville. News of the sudden death spread rapidly through the halls of Central High School. An empty desk in a morning class quickly transformed into a wave of panic. Administrators made a somber announcement, and grief counselors were immediately dispatched. But beneath the profound sorrow lay an undercurrent of absolute terror. The community was paralyzed by the idea that a random sniper was targeting teenagers in their beds. Parents rushed to lock their doors, cancel extracurricular activities, and pull their children out of school. The rumor mill churned with theories of gang initiations or a local prowler, feeding a collective paranoia. The town needed answers, and the pressure on law enforcement was immense. While the community panicked, the detectives began systematically clearing the victim's inner circle. They needed to interview family, friends, and naturally, the ex-boyfriend. The investigators were already aware of the volatile history between the two teenagers. The mother had informed the responding officers about the suffocating relationship, the recent breakup, and the bizarre theatrical events of the preceding weekend. The anonymous threatening texts, the man in black banging on the door, and the highly publicized, fabricated kidnapping. To the seasoned homicide detectives, these were glaring red flags. The staged events painted a psychological profile of an individual desperately losing control and attempting to manipulate his way back into a position of power. But as the police built their timeline, the prime suspect was busy constructing his own alibi in the public eye. Riley Gall took to social media to deliver a sickeningly elaborate performance of grief. He posted a lengthy tribute online, expressing his profound devastation. He wrote about how much he loved her, claiming that she was in a better place and that he would never forget the memories they shared. He composed a sprawling, multi-paragraph dedication to her beauty and her spirit, ending his digital monologue by stating that he loved her more than anything. This digital mourning was a calculated facade. It was an attempt to control the narrative, to position himself as the heartbroken survivor rather than the architect of the tragedy. He was weaponizing the community's sympathy. When detectives brought the college freshman into the interrogation room, they observed his demeanor closely. The young man sat before them projecting an aura of quiet sorrow. Using a standard, non-confrontational approach, the investigators asked him to walk them through his weekend and his whereabouts on the night of the shooting. He told the detectives that he had been entirely heartbroken over the recent breakup, but was trying to move on. He claimed that on the night in question, he was safely in his college dorm room, fast asleep, completely unaware of the horror unfolding miles away. He feigned absolute shock when discussing her death, maintaining steady eye contact and offering polite, cooperative responses. He portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance, a grieving boy caught in a nightmare. The investigators listened patiently, documenting his alibi without immediately revealing the cards they were holding. They knew his timeline was fragile, but to break a suspect who was this committed to his performance, they needed definitive physical evidence linking him to the 9mm casings found in the frozen grass. The midpoint pivot of the investigation arrived rapidly, delivered not by a crime lab, but by a separate police report filed over the weekend. While canvassing records, detectives discovered a report regarding a stolen firearm. The owner of the missing weapon was the suspect's own grandfather. He had reported to the police that his 9mm Glock pistol had been taken from his vehicle just days before the shooting. The theft had occurred during the exact same window of time when the suspect was frantically escalating his stalking behavior, right around the time of the fake kidnapping and the Prowler incident. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. The caliber of the stolen weapon matched the shell casings left at the crime scene. The detectives realized that the suspect hadn't just fabricated a kidnapping to gain sympathy. He had used the chaos of the weekend as a smokescreen to procure a murder weapon. The alibi was beginning to fracture. The grieving boyfriend act was collapsing under the weight of circumstantial evidence. But knowing someone is guilty and proving it in a court of law are two very different hurdles. The weapon was still missing. The suspect was sticking to his dorm room alibi. The police knew they had their man, but they needed the gun to secure a conviction. If he managed to dispose of the 9mm Glock before they could find it, the physical link tying him to the execution would vanish. The investigation shifted from a fact-finding mission into an active, high-stakes hunt for the firearm, and the detectives were about to get help from the most unlikely of sources. The breakthrough materialized from inside the suspect's own inner circle. Two college freshmen, Alex McCarty and Noah Walton, found themselves wrestling with a sickening realization. They had spent the previous days in close quarters with the supposedly grieving boyfriend, but his behavior behind closed doors blatantly contradicted his public mourning. He was highly agitated, pacing his dorm room and obsessing over forensic science. He eventually asked Alex how to completely wipe fingerprints from a textured metal surface. Even more damning, he confessed to possessing the missing firearm, spinning a frantic lie that he had taken it solely for personal protection against the imaginary kidnappers from the weekend. The two young men connected the dots. They realized their friend was not a traumatized survivor, but an active threat attempting to cover his tracks. In a display of profound moral courage, Alex and Noah made a terrifying choice. They walked straight into the Knox County Sheriff's Office. They informed the lead detectives that the suspect still had the stolen pistol and was actively plotting to throw it into the river. Investigators knew this was their only window of opportunity. If the weapon ended up at the bottom of the deep, fast-moving waterways of East Tennessee, the physical link tying the perpetrator to the execution would vanish forever. The detectives devised a high-stakes sting operation. They took the two college students into a secure room and equipped them with covert transmitters. Wires were taped flat against their chests. Tiny microphones were meticulously concealed beneath the thick fabric of their winter coats. The parameters of the plan were inherently dangerous. Two untrained teenagers were going to get into a confined, moving vehicle with a desperate, cornered individual who had already demonstrated a willingness to take a human life in cold blood. Night fell. The undercover operation commenced. Alex and Noah met up with the suspect at a pre-arranged location. They climbed into his vehicle. The air inside the small cabin was suffocatingly thick with unspoken tension. Hidden beneath their heavy coats, the transmitters hummed, relaying every agonizing second of audio to a fleet of unmarked police units, trailing miles behind in the pitch black. The suspect navigated the vehicle through the dark, winding rural roads toward a desolate wooded bluff overlooking the Tennessee River. During the agonizingly slow drive, the hidden microphones captured exactly what the state needed. The suspect spoke with a chilling, detached calm. He instructed his friends on the exact mechanics of their mission, detailing how they were going to help him hurl the heavy object into the deepest part of the current. The audio feed revealed no tremor of grief. There was no sorrow for the girl whose life had been extinguished just 48 hours prior. There was only the cold, mechanical calculation of a predator trying to save himself. They reached the designated drop site. The vehicle's tires crunched to a halt over the frozen gravel. The suspect put the car in park. He reached down into the shadows beneath the passenger seat. He pulled out a black plastic trash bag. Inside the crinkling plastic rested the stolen pistol, a pair of dark gloves, and a heavy black hoodie. He grabbed the handle of the car door. He prepared to step out into the freezing air and walk toward the water's edge. He never made it to the riverbank. The absolute darkness of the gravel lot was instantly shattered. Blinding white floodlights ignited from every direction, illuminating the bare tree line with daylight intensity. The sudden, deafening roar of high-performance engines echoed off the bluffs as unmarked police cruisers surged forward, trapping the suspect's vehicle in a wall of steel. Heavily armed tactical officers swarmed the perimeter. Commands were barked through amplified bullhorns. The suspect froze. The calculated composure he had maintained for days evaporated in the blinding glare of the police lights. The black plastic bag slipped from his grasp. It hit the floorboards with a heavy, metallic thud. Officers pulled him from the driver's seat. He was forced face down onto the freezing asphalt. Steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists with a sharp, definitive click. The meticulously constructed theater of the heartbroken college athlete completely collapsed, leaving only the terrified reality of a captured fugitive. The weapon was secured without a single shot being fired. The sting operation had executed flawlessly, capturing the physical evidence necessary to ensure that the architect of this tragedy would never exert control over another human being again. The courtroom in Knox County offered no stage for theatrics. When the trial commenced, the defense attempted to spin a narrative of a tragic, unintended accident. They argued the defendant had merely intended to frighten his ex-girlfriend by firing into the dark house, hoping she would be terrified and run back to him for protection. A reckless stunt had gone horrifically wrong, but the physical evidence was insurmountable. Prosecutors methodically dismantled the accident theory. They presented the trajectory mapping to the jury, demonstrating how the weapon was held directly against the exterior vinyl siding and angled perfectly downward, aimed precisely at the corner where the victim was sleeping. It was a terrifying calculation, completely devoid of panic or error. The audio captured during the sting operation ultimately sealed his fate. The jury listened in absolute silence as the former athlete mechanically plotted to dispose of the stolen firearm, displaying zero remorse for the life he had extinguished just 48 hours prior. The facade of the heartbroken survivor was completely obliterated by his own recorded words. The jury deliberated briefly before returning their verdict, guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder. He received a mandatory life sentence, ensuring he would never again manipulate or exert authority over another human being. While the gavel strike offered legal resolution, it could not fill the permanent void left behind. The tragedy fundamentally altered the local community, stripping away the innocence of suburban adolescence. A vibrant, compassionate future was erased by an individual who believed that if he could not possess someone entirely, they simply could not exist. A final, grim reminder that extreme control is never a symptom of love. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.